Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. And today, our guest is David Bennett. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited about this interview. You have a very unique, well, few unique experiences to share with us. Before we get started, would you mind just sharing a little bit about who you are, a little background on yourself?
Yeah, I was, I became a naval engineer. I went into the private sector where we did underwater exploration. I was the chief engineer of a research vessel. But then I had my near-death experience, and I needed more. So I quit my life at sea. I became the manager of dialysis programs in central New York at St. Joseph's Hospitals out of Syracuse. And then I had some other experiences that pulled me away from that. And I enjoy, I do a lot of, I've written about, contemplations and contemplative living, that sort of thing. And I have my own little podcast that talks about that on YouTube. And then I do a lot of volunteer work for IANS. I coordinate all the local groups internationally for IANS.
Can I ask you, did you happen to grow up religious at all, or spiritual?
It's kind of interesting. I had a very dysfunctional childhood because my mom was a single mom when it wasn't popular to be a single mom. And so she thought she's doing the best thing for me, but she used to put me in with one family, and they would have one belief, and then find out that maybe they were abusing me in one way or another. And she'd pop me out of that family and put me in another family. And the scenario would repeat, rinse and repeat a few times. And then finally, I was put into a family that was more Methodist. But I went through a number of different families with different beliefs. And so I never really adopted any of the beliefs. In fact, I wasn't even baptized till I was 14. So yeah, I didn't really, and my mom was pretty much agnostic. So yeah, I wasn't really pushed toward, all these different families were trying to push me into their belief system, but but I saw a lot of contradiction and stuff. So I never really adopted a belief system. And although I found one. She moved me to Arizona for a while, and I grew up with a bunch of Native American grandmothers that really resonated with me, and they taught me how to meditate when I was 14. So that
interesting.
Would have been, I would have said, my core belief system back then.
So your mom was too busy or whatever with her life, and so she were you adopted into or fostered?
Well, eventually I had some people that became my legal guardians.
Okay.
But mostly she used to, pay these people $5 a week to house me.
Okay, that's different. Okay, so now I'm curious, would you mind sort of walking us into leading up to your near-death experience? So you're just working and you don't have a lot of spiritual beliefs, I guess, necessarily.
No, not necessarily, but I became an engineer. And so I was very, I kind of put away that Native American spirituality because, you got to make a living in life. Let me tell you what my philosophy was before my near-death experience. My philosophy was you cut your swath through life. Okay. It's kind of brutal, but because I was thrown from family to family and had a really dysfunctional kind of childhood, I learned very early on that you had to rely on yourself, and that no one was going to take care of you except for yourself. So it's kind of it's a very brutal survivalist type of mentality is kind of what I had. But and it also tends to feed the ego quite a bit. So I was very prideful in everything that I was accomplishing, because I became the chief engineer of a research vessel by the age of 27. And I was really proud about that fact. And so, I'd done some time in the military, got some training, stuff like that. But I was pretty much an engineer and a logic thinker. And that's who I was on the day that I had my near-death experience.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to be real curious for someone that thinks like you, what in the world could you have been thinking is going on? But please continue if you would.
Yeah, so in 1983, March of 1983, I was the chief engineer of the research vessel Aloha, and we did underwater exploration. It was like my dream job. I got to combine diving with engineering, and it was everything that I wanted in a job.
Yeah.
And so we had just evaluated a new remote operated submarine, an ROV, and there was a storm off the California coast, and we were trying to beat the storm into our harbor. And the harbor master wouldn't allow the ship in because there were 25, 30-foot breakers at the breakwater at the harbor entrance. And so they just, the captain kept the ship about 2 miles off the coast, away from the breaker zones and everything. And but we had folks on board that needed to get into LAX. And so the captain and part of the crew that needed to be relieved and needed to get back. And one of them was one of the design engineers for this new ROV we were evaluating. We loaded them up in a rubber Zodiac. I don't know if you know what that is, but you see the Marines use it for landings and stuff like that. It's like a rubber boat. Okay. Very sturdy, reliable. We used to use this boat to retrieve our submarines and stuff like that. So it's a very durable craft. And we loaded it up, and the captain asked me, I was the chief engineer, and I normally don't leave the ship once we're out to sea. But I was third officer, and the second officer wasn't on this trip because it was just an evaluation trip. So no one else knew the harbor like I did. So of the crew that we had. So the captain asked if I'd go along and go in with one of the mates, and we would bring them into shore, and then we'd bring the Zodiac back out. And so I agreed. And it was kind of funny because this night, it was a rough night. I mean, this ship, 30-foot waves, I mean, it's substantial. Well, a couple miles offshore, they're just large swells. But we took a bearing. We went up and checked the radar and everything, because it was a stormy night. Dark and stormy night, kind of like so we.
Yeah.
It was hard. Visibility wasn't that great. So we took a bearing using radar, and we could see the harbor buoy flashing every once in a while. Whenever it was up on the top of a swell, we could see the harbor buoy. So we figured, okay, that's our target. So we got in the boat, we started heading in. On our way in, we would go up on a swell, take a bearing on where the harbor buoy was, then we'd go down that swell and up the next one and do it over again. But it wasn't very long that the storm had blown us way off course, and we couldn't find the harbor buoy, but the shoreline was lit up. It's California coast, it was lit up. So we figured, well, worst case, we'll just do a beach landing, and we'll get these guys to the harbor somehow, some way, so they can get back to, they can get, make their connections.
Right.
So we start heading in, and it wasn't very long. We were about a mile offshore still, and we ran into a breaker zone. And how we found out is we drove right off a 30-footer and crashed down.
Wow.
And I yelled to the mate, because I was in the bow trying to navigate, trying to see our way. And I yelled to the mate who was at the center console. I told him, turn us about and we're a lot safer out to sea than we are here in this breaker zone. And just then, the next one was right above our head. It came crashing down. It folded the Zodiac in half like a peanut butter sandwich. I was in the bow. It catapulted me into the sea, and most of the guys got squeezed out into the ocean. And I found myself being tumbled and tossed in the waves like a rag doll. But I'm a trained commercial diver. I've spent thousands of hours underwater. It's not it wasn't something that I was freaked out about. And this night we'd actually gone down the bosun's locker and got out life vests. So I was actually wearing a life vest, which is one of the few times that we wore life vests, because we worked on the ocean all the time. And we just, anyway, we actually had to beat the dirt off of these things. They were old World War II Mae West, the big puffy orange pillows, kind of like,
Yeah.
And so I'm hanging on to Mae West, and I'm thinking, okay, and I'm just, protecting myself, and because who knows what else is in the water being tumbled and tossed. And so, and I couldn't, I know how to survive underwater. So I tried blowing out some bubbles, but there was no visibility. So, and it was at night, so you couldn't see anything. It was dark, stormy. So, there's no street lights out there. So it was just, you're just hanging on.
Wow.
And this ocean was just ferocious. Well, you can only hold your breath so long. And they teach us in diver training, actually, that euphoria of oxygen deprivation and everything. And so I had gone through that. I recognized what it was, but then eventually you breathe in salt water, and I drowned. I found myself immediately in this blackness. The roar of the ocean was gone. The cold of the ocean. This is March on the California coast. The water comes out of the north. It's very cold water. I wasn't cold. It wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet. It was peaceful, but it was absolute blackness. And I felt suspended in this blackness, but I didn't feel like I was alone. It felt like there was this greater presence with me. I didn't know what it was, but I was very curious. And I was really curious because it was like, this is way beyond my training. What is going on? So eventually I saw this. It started out as just this pinpoint of light, but in that vast, thick blackness, it just, it catches your attention. And I don't know if I went toward the light or the light came toward me. There was no tunnel or anything like that. It was just movement toward this light, and the light kept growing bigger and bigger. And as I got closer, I realized it was millions upon millions of fragments of light, and they were all moving, and they had this unity to them. And I don't know if you've ever seen like a school of sardines or anchovies when they swirl around and they all kind of like move and flash.
Absolutely.
Like
Birds
they have one
too.
mind, right? Like they're all interconnected.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, that's kind of like what this light was. It was swirling and moving, and it was just absolutely breathtaking. No pun intended. But the I've never used that phrase before, but anyway, it just it was totally captivating. And as I got closer, I started feeling these waves and waves of love, like I've never ever felt before. I had a very dysfunctional, childhood, and so I never felt this warmth and this love that I was feeling coming off of this light. And 3 fragments broke away, and they came toward me. And when they came toward me, they were welcoming me home. And that is the thing that really gets to me every time I talk about this. Wow. is the welcoming home. And I recognize these lights as other beings. And I recognize they felt like family to me. Unlike any kind of family that I had in this physical life. And so eventually a dozen of them came greeting me, welcoming me, and loving me.
Did they
In
have
such a way,
form, like a physical form?
well, they had, I would have to say, they had elongated form.
Okay.
But they had, vision in when we leave our body, our vision is altered. It's actually amplified greatly. And so this was, it was like eyes. It was like I could see the eyes of this being and I knew who they were, and they could see my eyes and they knew who I was. Mm. And so they felt like family. They felt more like family, and they were welcoming me home. And they communicated to me that we were going into the light, deeper into the light. And we went to this area, to me, that felt like a giant sphere. And inside this giant sphere, I started to relive my life. And when I say I relived my life, it was more like I re-experienced everything, but not just from my perception, but from everyone and everything that I'd ever interacted with, from their perspective at the same time as my perspective. So it was like my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness.
Okay.
And I was seeing my life through this new panorama. Wow. And it was, it was just incredibly humbling, because like I said, I had a kind of a dysfunctional life. I was a brash young man. Like I said, I like to cut my swath through life. So it's a brutal philosophy. And I really didn't have a lot of, understanding for other people and things like that. And so I got to see some of the less savory parts of my life. Okay. I also got to see some of the parts of my life where I would do something with loving intention without looking for anything. And those moments created some of the biggest ripples. In other words, every time we do something, we set energy in motion, and this energy affects other people, whether we realize it or not. And so I got to see how my actions and interactions with people affected other people, and through their eyes and through their perception and through their feelings. So it was very humbling. It was incredibly humbling. But I got to see, kind of, if we add judgment to it, you get to see the good and the bad. But there was no judgment there. And my family was experiencing it with me at the same time, just as I was experiencing it. And they had no judgment. They were just loving me and supporting me through the whole thing.
And none of these family members, like soul family, you don't remember ever experiencing human life with any of them?
There's one of them was actually alive at the time that I had the accident. So his greater sense of light was there and met me.
Wow. Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah, we could talk about that if you want.
I'm curious.
So I went through this life review, and I got to this one point. It's kind of interesting. In the life review, everything that I had lived was absolutely crystal clear. And the interactions and the perceptions from all the people I'd interacted with and all the things that I'd done was absolutely crystal clear. But I got to a point where I had gone past my death, and then it wasn't as clear. It's kind of interesting. It was like looking down a corridor. The center of the corridor was very clear. But then there was this periphery that was like, just a little out of focus.
Fuzzy, okay.
Yeah. Fuzzy's a good word. And so I started down this corridor, and I started experiencing my future. At the time, I didn't realize what it was, but I started having these experiences that I didn't have a reference for in this life.
Okay.
And so, but it was a little disorienting. I'd have to honestly say it felt a little disorienting, but my soul family just loved me, supported me, buoyed me up, and gave me the strength to continue. But I reached a certain point where the light itself, you got to remember, you're inside this sphere with, that ripples outward, but it ripples outward into the light, and the light is surrounding you. All these, and the light itself spoke. It said, "This is not your time. You must return."
Okay.
And I perceived that light, those millions upon millions of fragments of light, as God. And God is telling me, this is not my time. I must return. And I said, no way. Nuh-uh, I'm not going back, because I'm loved like I've never felt loved before. I've got a family I didn't realize I had. And and my body is in that water. It is just, I hate this, I don't want to sound crude, but it was cold meat, and I just didn't want anything to do with it. It was broken, and
you're so disconnected in all ways from it.
Yeah, and I didn't want to go back to it. And the light spoke one more time. It said, "You must return. You have a purpose." And that word purpose just resonated through my being. And when you're out of your body and you're going through this process we call death, you have this expansive awareness that is like you're connected to every soul that ever was and every soul that ever will be. So you have this capacity of knowing so much more than what we have available to us in this physical sense. And so with that expanded consciousness, when I heard purpose, it resonated through me, and I understood it. And it was so simple and so efficient. It was like you could not agree. You could not agree. I mean, disagree. You could not disagree with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the minute I accepted that purpose, I found myself outside my body. My body's still in the ocean, being tumbled and tossed. And the three original light beings that greeted me, the soul family that greeted me, were with me. They were actually slightly behind me. And we're watching my body as it's still being, tumbled and lifelessly being tumbled and tossed around. And some of the wreckage from the Zodiac, actually the bow line, came down, and it came down and it wrapped itself around my arm. And the bitter end of the bow line was tapping my chest. And I'm observing this from outside my body. I'm observing this.
So weird.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, how am I going to fit in there? Because I'm this enormous light now. And how am I going to go in? And just about then is when another set of waves hit some of the wreckage, and the wreckage must have had some more air in one of the pontoons, and it jerked that line up. And when it did, it cinched around this arm, pulled my arm, actually dislocated my arm and my thumb, and pulled my body up to the surface, where it got entangled around the Zodiac, this pontoon, and another set of waves hit me, and it forced some of the salt water up. And that's when my soul family gave me a gentle push, and I found myself just vibrated right back into my body.
Vibrated. It's interesting use of words. Vibrated back into your body.
Yeah, because it was like a humming, kind of buzzing kind of sensation coming back into the body. And it wasn't comfortable. Because the body was in bad shape.
Yeah.
And we're still a mile offshore in this breaker zone that I was caught in. And I'm throwing up salt water. It wasn't a pretty sight. I couldn't speak, but I heard my name. I heard my name being called, because the other guys that were in the Zodiac now these are some brave guys. They stayed in this breaker zone to gather together. And this is something that we kind of learn when we're in trouble, we come together and we make sure everybody's all right. And so they were looking for me, and one of them had somehow hung on to a flashlight, and so they're sweeping the ocean with this flashlight, and my wife likes to remind me, yeah, they held on to that light. You went to the other light. And, but, but they were calling my name, and I'm hanging on to the wreckage and to stay up. And I couldn't speak because I breathed in all this salt water, and but I was able to make some squeaks and squawks, and they were able to finally find me, and they all swam over. We hung on to the wreckage, and we swam. After I died, we had to swim a mile to shore.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
It was a tough night. Yeah.
You're pretty hardcore. You're
but
pretty serious.
I was in seriously good shape back then.
Yeah, you must have been.
But it's kind of interesting, when you come back to your body, you're like half here, half there. So you still have this higher awareness available to you. And I couldn't stay on the surface. I kept being pulled down. And I kicked off my boots thinking that the steel toe boots were dragging me down. That wasn't it. And then I kind of, with that other awareness, it was like I kind of moved over into that awareness a little bit. And I realized that the Mae West that I was wearing something was wrong with it. And so I unbuckled it, and it turns out that the fiber lining inside the life vest was actually dry rotted and had become super saturated with salt water. And it was actually what was pulling me down, keeping me under the surface. If it wasn't for that bow line pulling me up, I never would have made it back up to the surface. So I got rid of the Mae West. I chucked that off, and then I was able to participate in hanging on and with one arm and kicking because I had a dislocated shoulder, and swimming into shore.
How much? I know this is more of a, we don't have to talk about this or get into a discussion about it, but I'm just curious, when you're sharing this story, how much of how you ended up going back up and all the thing getting wrapped around you and you're shooting up, did that have to do with your soul team or God, the lights making that happen? Or how
that's something that plays out. I'll tell you, played on my mind for years. So I believe that divine intervention was called for in order to
so you feel like divine intervention that can happen sometimes to help us continue on whatever path we're supposed to be on.
Yep.
Because some people feel like, oh no, it's total free will and there's no intervention. Then others are like, no, there's some intervention here and there to help.
Well, now when I was looking down that corridor of my future, that kind of explained free will to me a little bit. Ooh. That we have a path that we agree to in life, but we have a lot of periphery that we can go a little bit to the right or left, and then we come back, and we can, and so we have the ability to to take a side route here and there.
So our path is predetermined, but a lot of these choices are not.
Yes.
And that's where our free will comes into play.
And that's where free will, exactly. That's where our free will comes to play. Now we have another choice. We can sit right down in the middle of our path and decide not to do anything.
Okay, that's going to slow things down.
Yeah. I don't think I want that choice. I want to squeeze all the juice out of life. I want to take as many side jaunts as I could possibly take, tell you the truth.
Yeah, you're a risk taker.
Oops, sorry.
We forgot to turn that one off.
My watch. Forgot the watch. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so that reminds us to go back with the story. So you get to shore.
Yeah.
And then what was the recovery like?
Well, we're working offshore. We're really well versed in first aid and stuff because we have to take care of ourselves. So one of the guys popped my shoulder back in, and I popped my thumb back in, and we picked up the wreckage of the Zodiac, and we found our way up to the road and back to the harbor and everything. But
goodness.
When I got home that evening, there were a number of things that we had to do to communicate to the ship to make sure, because back in those days, we didn't have, unless you had a radio, which we did, but that was at the bottom of the sea. You had to use ship to shore radio in order to, it was, you called the ship operator and they would patch you in via radio to the ship. And so we had to tell them that we weren't coming back. We didn't want to say much more than that because, we figured there's a lot of wreckage that is going to come ashore. And so we wanted to collect as much of it as possible because a lot of it was our personal goods, that sort of thing. But we made it home that night. It was pre-dawn by that time. And my wife at the time didn't, when she saw the state I was in, she was trained as a nurse. It just didn't go well. I tried to tell her that I died and scared her. And so I didn't feel like I could share with her because it really freaked her out.
Had you heard of near-death experiences before this?
Not before this at all.
No.
And so, and a kind of a weird, being a commercial diver, we put our lives on the line a lot. We have close brushes with death. And sometimes, I mean, if you're very lucky, you wouldn't, but it happens, it was back in the 80s, commercial deep sea diving was very dangerous. And so, I mean, we couldn't even get life insurance. That was a fact. So we had kind of like almost like a code that we wouldn't say, you just don't talk about death.
Right. I understand.
And so I didn't feel like I could share it with my mates that were with me. And when they asked me, they said, Dave, you were gone a long time. Like they were thinking like 15 to 18 minutes is what they estimated.
Okay.
And I know I can hold my breath for a maximum of 3.
Okay.
Because I had, being a diver, your lungs tend to expand. And so, they couldn't understand that. And I made light of it. That's kind of what guys do, and those types, we tend to, the bravado comes out,
Sure.
And we laugh it off. And so I would say, well, Neptune spit me back, and that was as much explanation as I cared to give.
Wow. How did you hold this in? When did you first tell the story?
It's kind of weird. You come back and a lot of times you're given these little gifts. And I was given these little gifts. I suddenly could see auras. Okay.
Yes. I've heard a lot of gifts come back sometimes.
Yeah, I could see, and I didn't know what an aura was. I'd never even heard of one. So I called them life force energies.
Okay.
Because they were around everything. Southern California has a beautiful palm trees, and you should see the aura of a palm tree. It's just absolutely stunning. And so, next day one of my new life, I'm seeing auras, and suddenly I'm getting these intuitive knowings. I mean, rich, deep, intuitive knowings were coming to me. And I didn't know what to do with it. And it freaked me out. I was an engineer. I didn't have any of this before.
I know. You got this logical mind, analytical mind. What in the world?
Yeah. And I wanted my old life back. I don't know what the heck this is, but I don't know how to deal with it. And I want my old life back. And it was about 3 days. Took me about 3 days to not feel like I was half here and half there. And it diminished a little bit, but the intuitive knowings kept coming, and now and then I would see these auras and stuff. And so I did what any good engineer would do. This new knowledge was coming to me. I didn't trust it. So I tested it. How veridical is this information? Is it something I can trust? Because it wasn't anything I learned in school, wasn't anything I'd experienced in life.
Yeah.
Where did it come from? Is it reliable? Those were my questions.
Yeah.
And gosh, they were very, very reliable. And they were truth, there was a lot of truth in it. But some of the information was about my fellows. Some of it was about things that were going to happen on the ship. It was just coming at me from a lot of different directions. And I had to get a grasp on it somehow, some way. So I was fighting it and feeling totally isolated. And this went on for about 11 years until I had another experience. And so,
wow.
but
Okay.
toward the end of the 11 years, I thought I had a pretty good handle on this. You know, I had learned, you know, and I started to rely on this intuitive knowing and this, and all of these things. I began to integrate it into my thing. But the rest of the near-death experience, talking to God, arguing with God, all of those sort of things, it really spooked me. And so I tried to stuff that as far back in my brain as I possibly could.
Okay.
It was like, I thought of it as like I stuffed it in a box, wrapped it up with duct tape, because divers love duct tape. And
you
put
didn't
it
want to
on,
analyze it. You didn't want
put
to
it on a shelf.
contemplate it.
Yeah. I put it on a shelf, and I didn't want, and I, you know, and in magic marker, I wrote, "Do not touch," you know, and don't forget about it.
And
I
you
don't want
did. Wow. But
Yeah, I
so,
did for 11 years until another experience.
that's interesting. So you had to be kind of knocked again to don't forget about it, Dave.
Yeah. I think what it did is it set up kind of a spiritual crisis. And when I was younger, and those Native American grandmothers, they taught me how to go into my sacred space. And I fell in with this group of people that were going back to Sedona, where I grew up. And so they wanted, it was a spiritual community that was going there. Okay. And so I went with them, and we went to this place that I knew well as a kid. And I'm sitting there, and I'm going to go back into my sacred place. And suddenly the voice, the light, spoke to me. It said, "Return to the light." And when I did, I found myself back in that blackness, the void. And I went through the entire near-death experience, only this time I'd lived 11 years in my life review. And I didn't think I had changed. But in the life review, I saw how much I really had changed, because I did adopt some things from the first experience. You know, you can't go through that life review and suddenly not know who you are. And at 27, who knows who they are at 27? But I suddenly, at 27, knew who I was. And so I called that acceptance. I had learned acceptance of myself and who I was. But I also had learned tolerance and tolerance of other people and their paths, because I saw how in that life review, our interactions, we have, you know, we all have our own paths, and that I may not agree with your path or what you're doing, but I can accept that that's your choice and that's your life that you're living. So acceptance of myself, tolerance of others in the situation that I find myself in, and then truth, acceptance, tolerance, and truth. I found that there's a higher truth, a truth that resonates within each and every one of our hearts. That's our personal truth. And so I took that, that was kind of my mantra.
That's great.
Acceptance, tolerance, and truth. And it had changed me. In that second experience, in that 11 years, I saw how much, just by adopting acceptance, tolerance, and truth, how much it had changed the way I live, the way I interact, everything. So
that's great.
That kind of woke me up that I have to really accept the whole package.
Not just
Yeah. And I started what I called my quiet ministry. Where I don't feel like I have to tell everybody about my near-death experience, but I can live by what I'd learned in that near-death experience.
Oh, how long ago was this? So it happened 11 years after the first
1994.
94. So you started
around Easter time, actually, of 1994.
Okay. So 94, and you're starting to, what did you call it? Your quiet
ministry.
Quiet ministry.
Yeah. And I had changed my profession. I'd left, because another thing that happened in that initial 11 years was there was this urge, I call it a calling, a call to be more of service. that it's this overwhelming desire. And being, the chief engineer of a research vessel, we spend most of our, we spend 9 months out of the year, 500 miles away from humanity, out to sea. So, so I didn't feel like I was doing everything I could.
Okay.
And so I felt like I needed to, participate more in many ways. And so that pulled me away from that job, my dream job. And, and I started, and it was funny because spirit and that guidance just put me in certain circumstances. I ended up, managing a dialysis program with 5 dialysis centers. And, and I was using that intuitive knowing. And that's when I had my second experience. I had that job, and I started, after the second experience though, I started talking to spirit. I wasn't just getting downloads anymore. We were communicating.
Okay. So
now it's a communication.
Like telepathically?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times it comes to me because my soul family, those 12 people, they all have a connection with me, and they all communicate to me. So sometimes and I equate it to different flavors, okay? Because each one has a different kind of voice, a different flavor to their, and a different feeling that comes with it. So I've been able, through the years, I've been able to kind of.
So not different voice, but their voices aren't different. Is that what you're saying? But their personality, their flavor of who they are comes out strongly when they're communicating.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
So through that guidance, that's how I ended up, making career changes and things like that.
Okay. And then, so that was in the 94, you said. And then you had an actual, because that was something different.
That was a spiritually transformative experience.
Yes.
You have to put an official label on
that
it.
was an STE.
It was an STE.
NDE, STE, but then you did have another actual NDE?
Well,
after that?
I had stage 4 lung cancer that metastasized from my lungs into my spine, ate away 2.5 bones of my thoracic, and my spine could no longer, the tumor could no longer support the weight of my spine, and my spine collapsed. And it was not a pretty sight.
Sounds bad.
Yeah, my right lung and my spine were all full of cancer. And when they hospitalized me, they found lesions in my hip, my brain, my kidneys, and it was very aggressive and going through my body rapidly. They only gave me a few weeks to survive, and they were just going to give me morphine and Percocet, make me comfortable, and let me die.
How long ago was this?
2000. Okay. December 2000.
Wow. Okay. Did you see this in your life review that this was going to happen? You did.
I saw it in my preview. Yeah, in the
preview one. Really?
Yeah, the part of my life where I saw I was going to have cancer. I didn't see how bad it was going to be, but I did see I was going to live beyond it. So that kind of gave me, I don't know. I just knew because of all the experiences that I'd had because of these 2 previous experiences. But I had kind of another life review. It was kind of funny. I'm in the hospital. I'm pretty much immobilized because I have a broken spine. And and I had become a manager in this hospital, and I was very involved with the hospital. And I'm in the hospital that I worked with. So because it manifested itself while I was sitting at my desk. My spine collapsed while I was sitting at my desk. So people know me from all the shifts. Hospitals run 24/7, right? So people were coming into my room all hours of the day and night, sitting on my bed and telling me things that you showed me this, or you talked to me about that. And that affected me. And so it was like a living life review of my
Wow.
time at the hospital with
Okay.
with all these different, people from different shifts and stuff like that.
Oh.
And then I had an angel come to me while I was there. I think I had a brief episode where I left and came back, and but I saw her as one of the nuns. This is a Catholic hospital. I saw her as one of the nuns that came, sat on my bed, and we talked about how to deal with the pain. Collapsed spine is very painful. And so she and I developed this, this meditation to kind of offset the morphine and the Percocet, so I wouldn't need it.
So she's sharing this with you while you're out of body.
Well, I was sharing with her, but she was like encouraging it more or less. And she's sitting, she's not sitting, she's standing next to my bedside. And so when she left, I rang the nurses and I said, because I knew most of the nuns that worked at the hospital, because we have a nun that was attached to our division, to the nephrology division. We had a nun, and I knew a lot of the nuns from some of the other divisions. And so I rang the nurses. I said, "Who's the oncology nun?" I said, "That was just in here." I said, I don't know her. I didn't recognize her. And they had moved me, because so many people were visiting me. They had moved me to just outside the nurses station, because they were putting a stop to visitors coming day and night, because, I needed my rest so that I could die peacefully, I guess. But anyway,
Okay.
but they had, so they were watching. My door was right in front of them. So they saw everybody that was coming and going. And so I wanted to know, who was this nun. I wanted her name, because I found what we had just shared was so beneficial. It just really lifted me up. Just her presence really lifted me up. And it turns out there was no nun.
Okay.
No one had come to my room.
And you perceive her now
And
as
I think
an
she was
angel.
an angel. I think she was an angel.
Okay. And what you guys worked out did help your pain management of it.
Yeah. She gave me a meditation. I wrote it. It's in my book. I wrote about it because it helped me to, because morphine and Percocet, it's like a roller coaster. It comes.
Yeah.
You get a high and then you come down, and it's just the pain is there, and then it goes away, but then it comes right back. And so it's I use this to mitigate the lows.
Okay. So, and by the way, I do want the listeners, we do have listeners and viewers, they'll want to know the name of your book. And I'll put it in the video description, the link.
Yeah, it's Voyage of Purpose.
Voyage of Purpose.
Yeah, Voyage of Purpose, spiritual wisdom from near death to life. Okay.
Wow. I'm so glad you wrote a book about this too. This is.
Yeah, because there's a lot of change that comes about after a near-death experience, and my book is it shares the near-death experience. It shares a teeny little snippet about who I was before, but then the majority of the book is about the integration of the experience through the different spiritual experiences that I had, and through the cancer, to help me to survive all of this, because each experience builds upon the next, and it yes, because all of us are a culmination of all of our life's experiences. So yeah. And you are a busy man. What are your current projects that you're working on? Yeah, well, like I said when I was talking about who I am, I'm the coordinator for all the local groups for IANS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And so I help coordinate all the groups, all the local groups that meet and have meetings about near-death experiences. I've also authored a couple different books. The second book is A Voice as Old as Time. It's out of print right now, but you can buy it through my website, which is dharmatalks.com, because I have a podcast, and you can reach my podcast. I have many of the most recent podcasts up on my website as well. So dharmatalks.com, and my podcast is called Contemplative Living.
Nice.
And also I'm a woodworker. I enjoy making altars and offering bowls and stuff like that.
You're very creative, and you recommend all of us to be more creative, as that is one way we can tap into source consciousness, the light. I'm not, whatever label you want to give it.
Yeah. I found that, by whatever gives us inspiration, because where does inspiration come from? It comes from our source. It comes from our connection to our higher nature, our true self. And so by tapping into your inspiration, you can develop that communication. And you can, that's what I use to kind of fine tune mine a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's an important message, is that you do feel that we could all tap into our soul family and into, some people call it guides, and into source and our higher self.
Yeah. I do. I believe it. I believe it's just patiently waiting for us to turn in that direction. And how you achieve that, because I mean, there's meditation, I use contemplation, but there's meditation, and there's a lot of different practices, and there's a lot of different ways of going about it. It's just a matter of finding what resonates for you, because I encourage people to use their inspiration to find, that creative source, that spark within them, because that's a part of our greater sense of who we really are.
Part of our purpose, would you say?
Yeah. We all have, I think the greater purpose for all of us, and an interconnected purpose that we all share, is connecting to ourselves and connecting to our higher self. I think that's a shared purpose. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. I think one of the common experiences, this human physical life experience, is emptiness, feeling like you're always constantly trying to be connected, and for a lot of us, never quite feeling like there's that missing piece, that we're not quite connected. So it's like an emptiness, a loneliness. And what do you
I call it the illusion of separateness. It is an illusion, because we all are interconnected, but most of us, I would say the majority of us, have had some form of spiritual experience. And we all have the ability to, we all can visualize. Okay. Every one of us can visualize what our front door looks like. Okay. Well, then why don't we visualize that spiritual experience? Take the time to explore that spiritual experience through your own visualization. See where it takes you. You might be surprised.
And I know we're running so quickly out of time. This has been so interesting. But I do want to leave you sort of with the last words. If there's anything else on your heart that you're thinking, oh, I wanted to share this one thing and didn't have a moment to do that.
I would say, find your footing in life. Explore yourself, because I really believe that I've learned that when spirit is patiently waiting to connect with us. And when we find our footing, when we find who we are, we're quiet enough to be able to have that communication. And you don't have to look anywhere outside of yourself for it, because we all have it within us.
I agree. I love that. Thank you so much, David, for spending time with me. This has been amazing. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for Thanks for talking to me.
Yes, of course. And thank you to everyone watching. This has been Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary. And I hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating interview. If you did like this, please give it a thumbs up. And then if you like this type of content, subscribe to the channel. And I hope you're having a fantastic day or evening, wherever you are on the planet or off the planet. Bye-bye.